The courtroom lights are too bright, the microphones too close, cameras hum like a nervous chorus, beaming every glance across oceans and time zones. At the center sits Johnny Depp, an actor who once turned a pirate into a folk hero, hands folded, eyes steady, bearing a silence heavier than any costume he has ever worn. Across from him is the woman he once called home, now a voice of accusation before the world. What began as whispered promises has become sworn testimony. What began as private vows has hardened into filings stamped with the seal of law. Outside, the line of onlookers bends around the block. Inside, every word is transcribed, replayed, dissected, text messages turned into exhibits, audio into argument, intimacy into evidence. It is not simply a lawsuit, it is a referendum on love, truth, and the stories we tell about both. Fans who memorize punchlines now parse depositions. Headlines replace movie posters. The applause that used to meet him at premieres has transformed into a verdict-seeking hush. He is not a villain here, nor a saint. He is a man whose name, his livelihood hangs in the balance, claiming that a few printed sentences cost him the roof of his career. She is not a specter, nor a symbol, but a person insisting that her account is a boundary finally drawn. Between them sits a question larger than either. When two memories diverge, which one becomes history? How did affection curdle into accusation? When did a home turn into a battlefield mapped in legal briefs, each comma, each date, each tone of voice becoming a fragment of proof? Perhaps the answer isn't inside this room at all. To understand why the world is watching two people explain how their love unraveled, we have to step backward past the lights, the cameras, the curated statements, and find the small doors where everything started. Before the flashing cameras, before the courtrooms, Johnny Depp was simply a boy from Owensboro, Kentucky. Born in 1963, the youngest of 4 children, he grew up in a house that rarely felt steady. His father, an engineer, carried the weight of work and silence. His mother, a waitress, bore her own storms. The family moved often, more than 20 times before he was a teenager. Never long enough to plant roots, never still enough to feel safe. This constant uprooting shaped him. A boy without anchors learns to invent worlds of his own. For Johnny, it was music, first guitar strings humming in dim rooms, lyrics scribbled in notebooks, sound becoming a sanctuary. Yet, even melodies couldn't shield him from the fractures at home. His parents' marriage dissolved when he was 15. The divorce left a scar, one he later admitted taught him about survival, but also about the fragility of love. From these early years emerged a boy both sensitive and restless. Teachers described him as withdrawn, a dreamer. He carried notebooks filled with sketches, songs, fragments of dialogue, but behind his quiet exterior lived a volatility, a longing for connection colliding with a fear of abandonment. Those who knew him as a teenager remember someone who could be tender one moment and fiercely rebellious the next. The relationship with his mother was especially complicated. He spoke often of her sharp words and unpredictable temper, memories that lingered into adulthood. To cope, he developed a protective armor, sarcasm, humor, eccentricity that later became hallmarks of his screen presence. Yet underneath, there remained the boy who wanted nothing more than stability and warmth. Psychologists might call it a classic case of a child molded by chaos, someone who grows up searching for intensity because quiet feels foreign, someone who confuses turbulence with passion. That wiring, set in motion before he ever stepped onto a film set, would echo in his adult life. It would make him magnetic, capable of bringing characters alive with raw vulnerability. But it would also make him vulnerable to relationships that promised everything, then shattered into dust. The boy from Kentucky was already rehearsing roles he didn't yet know: the drifter, the dreamer, the man who longs to be saved. The boy who once strummed his guitar in small-town garages never imagined he would one day be one of Hollywood's most recognizable faces. Johnny Depp's career began almost by accident. After dropping out of school to pursue music, he followed his band to Los Angeles. Fate intervened when a chance meeting connected him with actor Nicolas Cage, who encouraged him to try auditions. His very first role, small but memorable in The Nightmare on Elm Street, 1984, put him on the industry's radar. But it was television that transformed him into a phenomenon. Cast as Officer Tom Hansen in 21 Jump Street, Depp became a teenage heartthrob overnight. His sharp cheekbones and soulful eyes made him a poster on millions of bedroom walls. Yet the young actor bristled at the label. Fame felt like another cage, one gilded and inescapable. "I don't want to be a product," he would say later. This hunger to resist typecasting pushed him toward directors like Tim Burton, who saw in Depp's oddness a kind of magic. Together they created films that turned him into a cult figure: Edward Scissorhands, Ed Wood, Sleepy Hollow. By the early 2010s, Depp had become a global star. His portrayal of Captain Jack Sparrow in Pirates of the Caribbean redefined swashbuckling for a new generation, earning him an Academy Award nomination and cementing his place in Hollywood history. He was no longer just an actor, he was a cultural icon, the face of billion-dollar franchises. And yet, behind the glory, the cracks were widening. Stardom came with relentless scrutiny, paparazzi flashes at midnight, headlines that speculated more about his private life than his performances. His aversion to fame, rooted in childhood restlessness, clashed with the demands of celebrity. He sought refuge in eccentricity, sprawling estates, unconventional roles, an entourage of misfits. To fans, it looked like genius. To insiders, it hinted at a man grappling with loneliness, alienation, and the constant weight of being misunderstood. Those who worked with him described him as deeply committed, almost to a fault staying in character long after cameras stopped rolling, obsessing over details that no one else noticed. But such intensity took its toll. With each new blockbuster, the gap between Johnny Depp the man and Johnny Depp the myth grew harder to close. He was adored, yes, but also increasingly isolated, surrounded by applause, yet aching for intimacy. And then, when he least expected it, someone walked into his life, someone who seemed to promise the stability he had been searching for all along. It began the way so many Hollywood stories do under the bright lights of a film set. In 2009, Johnny Depp met Amber Heard while filming The Rum Diary. He was already a legend, she a rising actress with striking presence. On screen, they played lovers. Off screen, sparks lingered long after the director called cut. At first, it seemed like destiny. Two souls colliding in a whirlwind of passion, creativity, and defiance of convention. Their romance bloomed publicly in 2012, and by 2015, they were married. To the outside world, it was a match wrapped in allure. Depp, the enigmatic superstar, and Heard, the bold newcomer. Cameras captured their red carpet appearances, their affectionate gestures, their carefully chosen words of devotion. To fans, it looked like a love story written for the silver screen. For Johnny, who had long chased stability, Amber appeared to be a partner who could anchor him. But behind closed doors, the story unraveled differently. Friends and staff later recalled that their home could turn from tender to volatile in an instant. Arguments flared into shouting matches, words became weapons, and suspicion lingered in the silence that followed. Both carried scars from their past, and those wounds seemed to surface in each other's presence. Where outsiders saw glamour, insiders saw turbulence. The relationship carried early warning signs, jealousy, mistrust, cycles of reconciliation that never truly healed. Yet those who loved them described a magnetic pull that kept drawing them back together, as if the chaos itself had become addictive. Depp, ever the dreamer, seemed willing to endure storms for the sake of fleeting moments of calm. Heard, fiery and uncompromising, matched his intensity with her own. They were two strong personalities colliding, neither able to surrender without a fight. The media caught glimpses, whispers of disputes, paparazzi photos capturing tense expressions, rumors too persistent to ignore. But both actors denied or downplayed the turbulence, insisting on their bond. In interviews, Depp called Heard kind and gentle, while she spoke of his artistry and spirit. The contradictions puzzled outsiders. Were they the perfect couple or a disaster waiting to happen? Over time, the strain began to show in Depp himself. Colleagues noted a shift. The once playful actor appeared more withdrawn, more guarded. He retreated further into his private world, leaning on music, on close friends, on the hope that the storm at home might one day pass. For a man who had always equated intensity with authenticity, letting go of the relationship seemed impossible. Hollywood thrives on spectacle, and in Depp and Heard, the industry found one of its most combustible pairings. Their love story, at first intoxicating, soon carried the hallmarks of something far darker, a bond that blurred the line between devotion and destruction. Neither could fully leave, and neither could fully heal. It was as if the very passion that drew them together was also the fire consuming them. And in time, that fire would leap beyond their walls, exploding not just into headlines, but into the halls of justice, where their private war would become a global performance. The year was 2022, and the courtroom in Fairfax, Virginia, became the stage for one of the most extraordinary trials in modern celebrity history. Cameras lined the back wall, live feeds broadcasted across continents, and millions tuned in daily as if watching a serialized drama. At the center of it all sat Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, no longer lovers, but adversaries, each armed with their version of the truth. What had once been private arguments was now public evidence. Text messages flashed on giant screens. Recordings, once whispered in the shadows of their home, echoed through the hushed chamber. Photographs, some tender, some bruising, were dissected frame by frame, their authenticity debated by lawyers, pundits, and the court of public opinion. Every sigh, every shift in posture, every tear was replayed on endless loops across social media. For Depp, the trial was more than a lawsuit. It was a battle for his name. He claimed that an op-ed written by Heard, though it never mentioned him directly, painted him as an abuser and wrecked his career. The man who once drew applause from packed theaters was now fighting for the right to be seen, not as a monster, but as a man. For Heard, the case was about voice and survival, about the courage to speak out even when the cost was immeasurable. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was electric, tense, unpredictable. Supporters camped outside, cheering for their chosen side, holding banners as though awaiting a rock concert rather than a legal proceeding. The internet split in two. Hashtags in favor of Depp flooded timelines, while others rallied to Heard's defense. Comment sections turned into battlegrounds. What should have been a private reckoning between two people had morphed into a cultural war, one where gender politics, celebrity worship, and the meaning of truth itself collided. Testimonies stretched over weeks. Former friends, bodyguards, house staff, medical professionals all were summoned to reconstruct the collapse of a marriage in painstaking detail. Each new revelation added another layer to the spectacle. Stories of arguments, accusations of manipulation, accounts of despair. It was raw, messy, and devastatingly human, yet it played out as entertainment for a global audience. Depp sat quietly, sketching in notebooks, while his attorneys pressed for contradictions in Heard's account. Heard took the stand, her voice breaking, describing moments she said no one else had witnessed. The trial became less about law and more about theater, each side performing for 12 jurors and millions more watching at home. For Depp, the moment was unbearable and surreal. To see decades of artistry, of characters that had defined generations, overshadowed by transcripts and cross-examinations. For Heard, it was isolating, a fight against a tide of voices that seemed louder than the evidence itself. Both appeared at times fragile, at times defiant, both locked in a story neither could control anymore. By the time closing arguments arrived, the world was exhausted yet unable to look away. Commentators asked, was this justice, or was it spectacle disguised as justice? Had the truth been uncovered, or had it been buried beneath performance and perception? As the jury withdrew to deliberate, silence filled the courtroom. Outside, chants rose into the humid Virginia air. Inside, two people who once held each other close sat yards apart, waiting for strangers to decide not just a case, but the legacy of their love turned war. And the question lingered, sharp and unresolved. How had a marriage meant to bind two souls together unraveled into a trial dissected by the entire world? When the jury returned, the room felt like it was holding its breath. For 6 weeks, the world had watched every detail of the trial unfold. Now, 12 strangers were about to render judgment not just on a lawsuit, but on the reputations of two people once bound by love. The verdict favored Johnny Depp. The jury found that Amber Heard's op-ed had defamed him, awarding millions in damages. For Depp, it was more than financial compensation. It was vindication, a public reclaiming of dignity he believed had been stripped away. As the decision was read aloud, his supporters erupted in cheers outside the courthouse, their voices echoing across social media feeds. To them, it was a triumph of truth over slander, of a man restoring his name against impossible odds. But victory came at a cost. The trial had exposed every corner of Depp's private life, his struggles, his language, his darkest moments, turning them into global gossip. While he had won in court, The wounds of public humiliation were not so easily closed. Studios had already severed ties, contracts had dissolved, and the shadow of scandal lingered over his career. For Amber Heard, the verdict was devastating. Though the jury awarded her a smaller sum on a counterclaim, the public narrative cast her as the villain. She left the courthouse surrounded by cameras, her statement trembling with disappointment. To some, she became a symbol of a movement betrayed. To others, an actress whose story had failed to convince. Either way, she carried scars that no judgment could erase. The wider consequences rippled far beyond Hollywood. The trial sparked debates about gender, power, and credibility. Could this verdict silence survivors of abuse, afraid of disbelief, or did it highlight the dangers of weaponizing accusation? Commentators disagreed, but all acknowledged the cultural earthquake the trial had set off. Behind the headlines, the human cost was immense. Friends had been dragged into testimony, families thrust into the spotlight, private conversations turned into exhibits. The court had become both theater and battlefield, and when the curtain finally fell, everyone involved seemed diminished. For Depp, the trial ended with a measure of redemption, but it was redemption bought with years of turmoil. For Heard, it left a legacy of doubt and division. For society, it raised a mirror to our appetite for scandal, reminding us how easily personal pain can be consumed as spectacle. And yet, even after the gavel struck for the last time, one question refused to fade. What truly remains when love ends in a courtroom and justice itself becomes part of the performance? When the courthouse emptied and the cameras shut down, what lingered was not only a verdict, but an echo of love soured, of reputations torn apart, of a world reminded that even icons are fragile. For Johnny Depp, the trial marked both a fall and a rebirth. Though his career had stumbled, the outpouring of support from millions of fans reaffirmed his place in cultural memory. To them, he remained the beloved actor who gave life to Jack Sparrow and Edward Scissorhands, an artist too singular to be erased by scandal. His victory, however, was not pure triumph. It carried the weight of years lost, of trust broken, of wounds that fame could never heal. For Amber Heard, the legacy was harsher. The trial defined her in ways no performance ever had, reducing her career to a headline, her identity to a controversy. Yet, even within the storm, some saw her as a symbol of defiance, a woman who spoke her truth despite overwhelming odds. Her story, however contested, became part of a larger debate about gender, power, and belief in a world where personal struggles are devoured by public appetite. Beyond them both, the trial left society with uncomfortable lessons. It revealed how easily the line between justice and entertainment blurs when celebrity is involved. It showed how a private bond, once tender, can become global theater. And it forced the world to confront its hunger for scandal, a hunger that turns human suffering into ratings and clicks. In the end, what remains is a cautionary tale. Love can elevate, but it can also destroy. And when that destruction unfolds beneath the unforgiving gaze of the world, it leaves behind not closure, but a haunting reminder. Some stories are never fully resolved, they are simply lived and remembered.